Hello everyone, and today we're taking a look once again at our Steam console. Couple of changes that we've made. One, we're running a new operating system. We are running Chimera OS this time. And number two, we've added a dedicated GPU. As you can see, their OS name is now Chimera OS. Different build to Holo ISO. Does use the Steam gamepad UI, which is what this is called that you're looking at here. It is designed for a console use, essentially. So we've got a Ryzen 5 5600G, and we've got our AMD Radeon Graphics Navi 22, which is correct. You know, that was what the 6700 was coming up as. 10 gigs of VRAM in there. And again, so Chimera OS is an OS that is a distribution of Arch Linux, similar to SteamOS. It does have full support for gamepad UI, which is what this is, essentially. It's the Steam Deck's UI. We are going, just flicking around the display settings here. We're using same DualShock 4 we're using via Bluetooth, and everything works. We were running a 1080p, and we'll change it to 1080p. Has to be for the capture resolution, unfortunately. But we can, change that. We can change the in-game resolution, but for the capture card, it will only capture things at 1920 by 1080. So let's get testing. We'll get some games loaded up, and we'll see how much of an improvement the dedicated GPU is. Okay, so let's go and check out The Witcher 3 then. Running at 1440p and Ultra Plus settings, as you can see here. Running a bit better than Windows, I would say. That's not right. I can't see for the SteamOS display. Say 1440p. For some reason, 144 is the maximum frame rate that you can do, but we'll never get anywhere near that. And you can see the GPU is boosting to 2610 megahertz, which is a lot higher than it is in Windows. It was only 2500, and we ran high settings, no ray tracing, obviously, because GameScope doesn't support it. But yeah, the frame rate, I think, is a little bit better than that. Now, this thing, I don't know how reliable this overlay is. Ignore the resolution. The 1280 by 800. That's just showing the maximum that the Steam Deck can support. Because, again, it doesn't expect you to go any higher than that, I'm guessing. So you can ignore that. Also, the CPU power draw is showing as 0 watts. And that's doing really well. 4.4 gigahertz. For 0 watts. And you see when you go into White Orchard here, the frame rate does dip into the 60s. But yeah, the performance is pretty nice. I mean, bear in mind, The Witcher 3 is a Chimera OS verified game, as well as a Steam Deck verified game as well. So I think the performance is pretty good. Again, we can't have ray tracing. You saw the performance in Windows with ray tracing in the last video that we did on the 6700, and it was like 45 FPS with ray tracing on. So I would say, wouldn't recommend ray tracing being on here, but this is not too bad, actually. It's performance is pretty good, and considering the last time we were running, frame rate was in the 90s, but we were running high settings. This is Ultra Plus, so this is 2 settings higher, and we're getting roughly similar performance here. And this is certainly better than a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X. This is better than them. They're limited to 60 FPS. They don't think they have an unlimited frame rate mode, but we're pushing up towards the 80s. And apart from the ray tracing, I mean, ray tracing, it's 30 FPS, and we can't have ray tracing here. The GPU will support it, but again, GameScope just doesn't support it here. So it's not supported on the Steam Deck anyway, ray tracing. So yeah, performance is pretty good, and the GPU temperature is getting up. I think the power draw is about right for that GPU, 141 watts, 140 watts-ish. I think that seems about right. It is one 8-pin power connector it has, plus the PCI Express power, so I think that seems right. You know, I think it seems right there. The RAM speed is wrong because it's 2000 megahertz. But only using 4 gigs of VRAM, 8.5 of system RAM. It's not bad. I'm quite happy with the performance in The Witcher 3. So let's move on to something else then. Okay, so normally we start with Elden Ring, and Elden Ring is deck verified, and it is Chimera OS verified, but it just will not launch. This is what happens when you try to launch it. You get the Steam screen, you get the initializing, the anti-cheat pops up, and then it just does nothing. So it's kind of like it does on my PC. This is what it just goes to a white screen and then crashes back to the desktop. So you get the the Steam menu, should we say, the PlayStation button, and the back button is all you get, and you can leave it here for as long as you want, but it just will not do anything. I don't know what's wrong with it, because it is again deck verified, and it is verified as working. If you go to the Chimera OS website, it does state that it is verified on Chimera OS, so it should be running, but I'm guessing maybe it's to do with the anti-cheat. You know, I don't know why it's not running, to be honest, but it will just stay on the screen. It's a bit disappointing that Elden Ring isn't running, because it would have been good to get that running. So I did try to change some of the settings. You can go into the properties here, and I tried setting it to 1440p, but I just went back to default. It does say to use, it was Proton hotfix is what it said in the Steam compatibility report. But if you try it here, it's downloading the Proton hotfix. That's one of the things it will do, is it will go and download it. So it did say that in the compatibility tab on Steam, on the Steam menu. It did say to try Proton Experimental or Proton Hybrid. Proton hotfix. Sorry, Proton Experimental is another one. Yeah, again, it just didn't work. We'll just wait for this to download just to show you. I don't know how to get it to run. So it's a bit sad that Elden Ring doesn't work. I think we do get a bit further with this, and then it goes back to what it was like on my PC. Because this is what it does on my PC. It goes to a white screen and then just crashes. Proton hotfix is downloaded for us, so it will launch. We get the anti-cheat screen, and then yeah, so this is what we've got, a white screen. We've got a bit further this time. But this is what it does on my PC, and I can't for the life of me figure it out. It worked fine on the Holo ISO. It works fine on the Steam Deck, the real Steam Deck. But yeah, it just does not work here. We have to just press the PlayStation button to go into the Steam menu and just exit the game, really. Again, we've got the PlayStation controller there. It is fully compatible, which is good with the DualShock 4. Again, we used it because it's got trackpad, so we just had to exit that, which is unfortunate, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, so moving on then to Spiderman then, and this time Spiderman works. The last time we tried this, of course, Spiderman did not work on the system, and it's running well, 1440p on high settings with the pedestrian density and the traffic density set to low. And you can see it runs okay. It's pretty comparable to Windows, and it gives you a reasonable performance. Again, no ray tracing because it doesn't support it. Just the options are grayed out, and the performance is actually not too bad, above 60 FPS, so it is comparable, you know, to the PS5 version. I think does the PS5 version not run 4K at 60 FPS? So we're getting 1440p and, you know, reasonable into the 90s occasionally, and well above 60 FPS. Perfectly playable again on this GPU. And again, the GPU is boosting up nicely. I think it's actually running better than it did on Windows. If we move away from Times Square here, the frame rate goes up into the hundreds. Again, just ignore the resolution that it states there. It is 1440p. You can set it in the menu. You can't set it in the in-game menu. You need to go into the Steam OS, the Steam Gamepad UI menu, But I think it looks pretty good, actually. It's running reasonably well. You know, frame rates are pretty good. It is pretty playable. Again, Times Square is probably the most taxing part of the game. But without ray tracing, it's doing okay. We've no option for it, unfortunately. But yeah, that Ryzen 5 5600G isn't actually a bad CPU for the money. I mean, considering it only cost £120, it was on sale at the time at £120. I think it was 116. You can see here if you run up the building, you're getting 140 FPS because there's no real challenge for the CPU, so it's not really CPU bound because we're not swinging around the city. And again, if you go up here, there's not a lot to render in the open world, and that's why it just pushes all the way up to become mostly GPU bound there. I don't think that GPU power draw is right, though. That doesn't seem right. It's under full load at 2610 megahertz, and it's reporting 108 watts. I don't think that's right. I just don't think it's calibrated properly to do these sort of high wattage GPUs. You can dive all the way down to Times Square there and watch the frame rate dip, but it is still crucially above 60. Now the frame rate cap for the Steam Deck menu that you use, or the Steam OS menu, whatever Gamepad UI menu that you use, doesn't work in this. If you set it to 60 FPS, it'll just go higher. So that's what I mean by we could trust the frame rate because I think it's running fine. And I think the GPU clock speed and the CPU clock speeds are all right. But there's certain things, the GPU is running quite hot, but it is boosting higher, though, than it did in Windows. It's boosting nearly an extra 100 megahertz, because it was only 24 to 2500 here. And yeah, you can see it's boosting a little bit higher, and the performance is a little bit better. Okay, so moving on to God of War then, again at 1440p and high settings, the same settings we ran on Windows, and it's actually better than Windows. It was in the 70s in Windows, and now look at it, it's pushing up to the 90s, pushing up to 100 FPS here, staying mostly within the 80s, and again, yeah, performance is better. I do believe that power draw, though. The power draw is different game engines are going to draw different amounts of power, just depending on the game and the engine. So these are 3 different game engines that we've looked at. They had The Witcher with the red engine. We had Spiderman. Can't remember. It uses probably a Sony in-house engine, and I don't know what God of War's engine is. But again, 3 different games, 3 different game engines. But again, the performance is excellent here. So this is the part that is usually the most taxing after the fight with the cutscene where you've got Kratos, the monster's corpse, and boy in the cutscene here. And this part here usually is where it becomes when Atreus comes in and starts stabbing it. Here you can see the frame rate dropping down 75 FPS, which is again better than Windows. Windows was in the 60s. Same settings, same game, but it's running through a compatibility layer. You can see the frame rate dropping down into the 60s now. It went to 61 was the lowest, and it was 65. So there's not much of a difference, we've got to say. It is very little. It's a couple of frames, but it's a couple of frames in favor of Linux here. So Chimera OS is doing quite well here with this kind of game. Yeah, most of the games we've looked at so far, again, have been better. The only exception is we've had to trade Elden Ring for Spiderman. We couldn't get Elden Ring to work, so that was the only real disappointment there. But yeah, God of War is perfectly fine at 1440p. It's again a reasonable performance. You could limit the frame rate to 60 FPS. You can use the in-game frame rate limiter, and again, there's no FSR or anything running here. This is native 1440p resolution. Okay, so The Last of Us Part 1 then is pretty awful, to be honest with you. And the thing about the Steam version, or the Linux version, we'll call it, of this, is that we can't really adjust a lot of the settings. A lot of the texture settings are locked. So it is a bit pointless adjusting a lot of the settings. This is kind of medium settings, and it's not the best. To be honest with you, frame rates in the 40s, but this isn't the best port. The good news is we're not VRAM limited, at least. because the texture settings have been chosen for us, and we can't change them. This is 1440p. I tried FSR on, and I tried lowering the resolution, and to be honest, the performance didn't really get any better than this, so we'll just call it a loss and move on. Okay, so Shadow of the Tomb Raider was a bit weird. I couldn't get this one to work. Again, this is Chimera OS verified. It's not Steam Deck verified, but it is Chimera OS verified. And I couldn't get past this launcher right here. You've got the Feral, which is another API that Linux uses. But yeah, I just couldn't get past this screen. No matter what I did, the controller didn't work. The trackpad didn't work. Plugging in a mouse didn't work. You can bring up the Steam keyboard, but that did nothing either. So to get past this on the Steam Deck, I had to use the touchscreen. And with this system, I don't have access to a touchscreen. So I don't know how we get past this. I tried plugging in a keyboard. I plugged in a mouse. Nothing there. Used the DualShock 4's trackpad. Nothing. Absolutely nothing registers on the screen. Pressed every button on the controller, pressed enter, pressed the arrow keys on the keyboard, tried left clicking, right clicking, moving the mouse. Nothing worked. Even just going in, that does work. The PlayStation button works to bring up the Steam menu. But other than that, yep, just couldn't get past that screen. So that's another one that we couldn't play. Okay, so we've had a look at the game, so let's go and have a look at the Chimera OS desktop. So to get there, it's pretty much the same as the Steam Deck. You just go to switch to desktop, and it will switch over. Now, you can't use the controller at all here on Chimera OS. It is a very basic Linux desktop. It didn't even have a web browser installed. I had to I installed Opera there. That's basically what it's got. Steam game mode, a text editor. You've got the sort of utilities. You've got the terminal, the archive manager. Your Linux terminal there is pretty typical of Linux, but it is fairly basic. Again, this is all you've got installed. I did install Opera because it does have the App Store there. I just installed a web browser. Opera's all right. It's decent enough. Install whatever web browser you want from the App Store. You can install the emulators and things. Again, you just go down. You need to click up here to bring up that menu there. You've got a little bit of options there. But again, it is fairly basic. It is designed to run like a console. There's the file explorer there in Chimera OS. But it is designed to be kind of lightweight, and there's your software center here. So you can get things like your emulators, your PCSX2s there, Citras there. You can install them, and again, you can use the Steam ROM manager to get them into game mode as well. You can install things like the Epic Store, and you can install... See, there's not a lot installed there. There's just not a lot there. That we've got that comes with it. Again, didn't even come with a web browser, so just install the web browser of your choice. RetroArch is there as well. That was installed. I only installed Opera, so there's not a huge amount of stuff there. There you've got your the color manager there, so you can just delete things, easily uninstall stuff from the desktop. Overall, Chimera OS is pretty good. It was better than Holo ISO because this store did not work. This software center just didn't work. It takes a little while to load here, but you can get all your emulators and again just supply it with the ROMs yourself. And again, it does support quite a lot of things. This was the thing that didn't work in Holo ISO. These just were all blank if you went to them in Holo ISO. It used a different front end. But I think overall it's pretty light, pretty lightweight. It's a pretty decent operating system. You could also dual boot Holo ISO. You can install Grub, which is the bootloader, and you could just dual boot between Holo ISO and Chimera OS if you want the best of both worlds. Like Spiderman didn't work in Holo ISO, sorry, and then Elden Ring didn't work in Chimera OS. So we could dual boot. Again, you can install You've got software there as well that you can use this. It's mostly designed to be used as a console front end. It did use Steam Big Picture, but Steam Big Picture changed to Gamepad UI, and Gamepad UI is the Steam Deck's user interface. That's just what it's called there. So anyway, that is all for this video. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon, and goodbye.